If you like what I do, consider joining my channel or donating to my coffee. Links in the description. Do you like Bloodborne? Do you like Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening? Do you think you'd like if those games were mixed together and made into a Metroidvania with a Game Boy aesthetic? Well, do I have a game for you. Tearscape! That was literally all I needed to know to get excited for this game, and it also has co-op if you're interested. And we all know taking down cosmic horrors is more fun with a friend. Anyway, what's Tearscape about? You are a hunter, assigned by the Great Mandate to hunt down monsters. But what are these monsters really that you're hunting, and how can you stop them for good? That's for you to discover. This all sounds great on paper, but does this fusion of two iconic inspirations actually deliver a brilliant hunt? Or is this poor hunter about to bite off way more than he can chew?
Combat.
I bet you're looking at Tearscape's Game Boy aesthetic and are predicting what I'm gonna say next, like, its combat is simple, and simple isn't a dirty word. Well, guess what? Tearscape's combat is a little more complex than you'd initially think. You have regular attacks, a dodge with iframes, a stamina meter to manage, and a shield you can use to block and parry. That's right, there's parrying in this game, and I sucked at it. You can also do a shield bash that deflects projectiles back at enemies, and guess what? I sucked at that too. But just because I sucked at these mechanics doesn't mean I didn't have fun with them when I was able to pull them off. Smacking fireballs back at cocky wizards will never not be fun. Your hunter also has access to tools, weapons with limited uses that require gunpowder to use. Gunpowder being a resource found in breakable objects and from enemy drops. There are a lot of tools you can find, and their utility is pretty diverse. They could be guns to shoot jerks, bombs to explode jerks in weak walls, this hook shot you can use to cross gaps, this cannonball that bounces off of everything, or even this spooky mask I found that freezes every enemy on the screen. Your hunter also has many different weapons he can equip, each with their own animations, speeds, stamina costs, and strengths. Swords, daggers, greatswords, and my personal favorite, whips. Whips may not look like much, but their delayed return deals damage, so if timed right on a big enemy, you can hit them twice with a single swing. And if you swing too early, that delayed return still might save you. Overall, it's a great weapon. Now, on to the main course, the bosses. Boss encounters are where you see some of the Zelda influence shine through. Most encounters either require you to use the tool you found in the dungeon to take down these beasts, and if you don't require the tool, then using the tool correctly will give you some kind of advantage. As for the Souls-like influence, that comes in the difficulty and boss damage. These big guys hit like a truck, so learning their patterns and mastering the dodge, block, and parry is necessary for survival. Oh, and don't forget stamina management. Every action, besides parrying, requires stamina, and if you aren't paying attention or fighting smartly, you'll get crushed sooner or later. Thankfully, our little hunter has an Estus Flask type healing mechanic to keep him on his feet. And also thankfully, unlike Bloodborne, these flasks recharge at checkpoints. So, heal to your heart's content. There is no vial farming in this game. Also, checkpoints are placed right outside boss arenas, so runbacks are very minimal. That may not be a big deal to you, but it's a pretty big deal for me. Not so thankfully, the game has corpse running. Dying has you drop all your tears you've collected, and you recollect them by returning to where you died. And since tears are how you level up in this game, losing them can be a real pain. To button up the discussion on bosses, I enjoyed them. I'm not afraid to reuse the old "they're tough but fair" phrase, and I thought their designs looked great, especially under the Game Boy limitations. The mid to late game bosses felt a little tanky, but that could be chalked up to my absolute refusal to switch up weapons because I loved the whip so much. Well, that, and my character build was focused on stamina, which I'll talk about more in depth in the next section. And that's going to be it for this section. Tearscape's combat ends up being a surprisingly rich little package, blending Zelda-style tool play with Souls-like timing, stamina, and boss brutality, all wrapped in a Game Boy aesthetic that shouldn't work this well, but absolutely does. Between the diverse weapons, clever tools, satisfying deflections, and tough but fair bosses, the game delivers a combat loop that's deeper than it looks and consistently rewarding, even when you're whiffing parries like a clown. It's scrappy, stylish, and way more engaging than its tiny pixels let on.
Abilities, platforming.
Remember how I said my build was focused on stamina? This is why. If you hold the dodge button, your hunter sprints, or more aptly, glides, until your stamina runs out. And gliding around this world feels pretty dang fun. There's not a single enemy in the game that can compete to a well-choreographed glide, so returning to the place where you died so you can pick back up where you left off is easy as pie. Anyway, Tearscape has a top-down orientation with zero jump-related platforming. I say zero jump-related platforming very specifically because Tearscape's many traps and obstacles require players to use their platforming skills like timing and positioning to overcome some of these sections. Tearscape's world is, ironically, full of bottomless pits. So much for solid world building. And navigating these pits and trap-laden rooms is a large part of the Tearscape experience. Expect to fall and retry segments a lot. Mostly, these rooms were a lot of fun and broke up the action nicely. My only criticism is that there were a lot of multi-mechanical traps that just didn't have any rhythm. For example, a section might have you moving from moving platform to moving platform while a couple of arrows are shooting at you, but these platforms and arrows aren't in sync, so getting across is way more challenging. This doesn't happen all the time, but when it did, it was pretty frustrating. The game's final boss, who I will not be showing, also has an attack that didn't have any rhythm, so dodging it felt more like luck than actual skill. I bring this up not because it's prevalent in the game's design. These non-rhythmic parts were pretty rare, and that's what made them stick out. These moments didn't sour the experience whatsoever, but they were a source of frustration in an otherwise well-designed game. But yeah, using your dodge to zip over small pits feels great, and many of the trap sections were a lot of fun. As for the abilities themselves, we're looking at the Zelda franchise staples. Bombs to blow up walls, a hook shot to get across chasms, and a gun to shoot switches. Okay, that last one is pure Tearscape, but you get the point. Tools are where the ability gating keys reside, except for the shield bash that destroys blue blocks. That's another Tearscape exclusive. When it comes to puzzles, Tearscape has some pretty interesting and unusual ones. They're observation-based puzzles that require you to pay attention to odd things in your surroundings in order to solve them. One has to do with these flowers and the other has to do with hitting these blocks. The flower puzzle requires you to remember these colored paint splotches hidden throughout the dungeons and use logic to determine the correct order to get your prize. And the block puzzle is a bit more complicated in that the order in which you hit blocks isn't as consistent as finding hidden paint splotches. Uncovering the block hitting sequences requires you to really scrutinize the environment to see if there are any assets ordered suspiciously. Needless to say, these puzzles are awesome. Every dungeon has their own flower and block puzzle, so keep your eyes peeled. I suppose one could criticize that these puzzles are reused too much, but I didn't mind them. I looked forward to spotting the splotches and asset anomalies whenever I stepped foot in a new dungeon. And the rewards for solving these puzzles were always worth it as well. That's it for this section. Tearscape's quote-unquote platforming ends up being a slick mix of stamina-fueled gliding, trap-filled gauntlets, and clever observation puzzles. The rare off-rhythm hazards are bumps in an otherwise smooth ride, and the Zelda-style tools slot neatly into the game's ability gating without feeling derivative. Between the satisfying movement, the fun, if occasionally chaotic, trap rooms, and the standout flower and block puzzles, this slice of Tearscape delivers a fast, engaging rhythm that keeps you scanning every corner of the map and smiling whenever you nail a glide across the pit.
Progression.
When it comes to progression, Tearscape is a Soulsvania that's best described as a Souls-like light. You collect tears from fallen foes and use them to level up 4 different stats: HP, stamina, weapon damage, and tool damage. Very Souls-like, but I say Souls-like light because weapons don't scale with stats, which makes sense with the game's more minimalistic design, and it's still every bit as addicting. As mentioned earlier, gear exists as weapons, shields, and tools. There's no armor to help with defensive stats, but there are tokens that modify your hunter in a variety of ways. Rings that increase a stat by a couple of levels, a backpack that doubles your gunpowder capacity, stuff like that. My favorites were tokens that affected my healing flasks. I found a token that made me invincible while drinking, which is as overpowered as it sounds, and I found a token that healed me twice with its drink, with the second heal proccing 10 seconds later. Some of these tokens are very creative and make experimentation as fun as it is necessary. There are also a couple find 3 of a thing to upgrade a things to discover. The game is pretty vague on what these upgrades do, so I'll be vague too. Just know that finding these 3 pieces of things is totally worth it. Tearscape is also full of NPCs with side quests. Some quests involve you returning animals to their owner, some involve finding items and returning them. There's not a huge variety here, but it works in tandem with everything else the game provides, such as the observation puzzles and the dungeons. And that's it for progression. Tearscape's progression ends up being a smart, streamlined take on the Soulsvania formula, light enough to stay approachable, but deep enough to keep you tinkering. Injecting tears into 4 core stats feels satisfying, the token system adds tons of creative build variety, and the little upgrade hunts are always worth the detour. Side quests don't reinvent the wheel, but they mesh well with the game's exploration and puzzle design. Altogether, it's a progression loop that's simple, flexible, and consistently rewarding without ever bogging the adventure down.
Exploration.
Tearscape's world is less about wandering through sprawling biomes and more about diving headfirst into tightly crafted dungeons. And that distinction matters. Biomes usually feel open, natural, and spacious, big stretches of land that invite you to roam, soak in the scenery, and stumble into discoveries. Dungeons are a different beast entirely. They're dense, deliberate, and labyrinthine, built to test your sense of direction, your puzzle solving, and your ability to read a room. Tearscape leans hard into that second philosophy, shaping its world around compact, puzzle-rich spaces rather than wide, scenic zones. That's not to say Tearscape's dungeons lack personality. Each one has its own look and atmosphere. What I mean is that exploration here is intentionally maze-like, built around tight corridors and deliberate navigation rather than wide, free-roaming spaces. That said, the game becomes impressively non-linear once you hit the early to mid-game, and stumbling into new areas when you least expect it is genuinely invigorating. I'd hit an obstacle, mark it on my map, come back later with the right tool expecting a simple reward, a new weapon, a token, something small, only for the game to open up an entirely new area instead. That's the kind of discovery Metroidvanias are built on, and Tearscape nails it. And because there are so many surprises and puzzles and hidden paths and lots of things to find on your journey, I'd say exploration as a whole is rewarding and fun. That said, the in-game map has one big drawback. There's no fog of war. Plenty of Metroidvanias shade out unexplored rooms so you can instantly tell where you've been and where you haven't. But Tearscape reveals the entire layout the moment you pick up the map. It still color codes areas and shows room shapes accurately, but without that fog, it's surprisingly easy to lose track of your actual path. Maybe that won't bother everyone, but I definitely found myself stuck in a couple of dungeons longer than I should have been simply because nothing visually distinguished explored rooms versus untouched ones. And while we're on the topic, I kinda wish the map would label where you last died, just to make corpse running a little easier. As far as fast travel is concerned, it's perfect. Every save point is a travel point, and you can choose your destination from an easy-to-read menu. It sounds basic, but it does everything it needs to do, and I have zero complaints. And that's it for exploration. Tearscape's exploration strikes a great balance between dense, maze-like dungeon crawling and the thrill of unexpected discovery. The world constantly rewards curiosity with new paths, puzzles, and surprises, and even with the map's lack of fog of war occasionally slowing things down, the moment-to-moment navigation stays engaging. Add in a flawless fast travel system, and you get an exploration loop that's focused, rewarding, and consistently satisfying to unravel.
Atmosphere, narrative.
Tearscape's general aesthetic is essentially Bloodborne remake with a familiar overhead Zelda perspective. The game has graveyards, zombies, giant werewolves, amorphous horrors, and conflicting organizations that are fighting for humanity in their own ways. The story isn't as deep as Bloodborne, but what'd you expect from a game developed by one guy using Game Boy hardware limitations? And given those restraints, I think he did a pretty good job. My only real critique is that I wasn't a huge fan of the game's music. I found some of the early tracks to be grating. That said, I was never a fan of the Game Boy's audio output, so this could 100% be on me. Overall, I found the graphics, character designs, and environments to be very well done. The entire visual experience is fantastic. As far as narrative goes, it's mostly delivered through NPC dialogue and notes you pick up along the way. It's easy to follow, not mind-blowing, but solid enough to keep you engaged. Where it stumbles a bit is in tying player agency to story progression. Taking down bosses doesn't really feel like you're pushing the plot forward. You're told to hunt them, you get your tears, and that's pretty much it. There's clearly a bigger picture at play, but the game doesn't surface that connection in any meaningful way and leaves players kinda confused after defeating a boss. Many times after defeating a boss, I was like, that's it? But like I said, things eventually fall into place, but even that can be missed if you're not paying attention. And that's it for this section. Tearscape's atmosphere nails the Bloodborne by way of Game Boy vibe with striking visuals, memorable creature designs, and a world that feels grim, strange, and surprisingly cohesive despite the hardware limitations. The narrative's simple but serviceable, carried by notes and NPCs, and while the story to gameplay connection can feel a little loose, especially after boss fights, it still provides enough intrigue to keep you moving. The music may be hit or miss depending on your tolerance for Game Boy audio, but the overall aesthetic package is strong, stylish, and far more immersive than you'd expect from a one-dev demake.
Final thoughts and score.
Tearscape is one of those rare demakes that refuses to be defined by its limitations. Instead, it uses them as a springboard, delivering tight combat, clever dungeon design, and a world that constantly rewards curiosity. It's not perfect, but its ambition, style, and mechanical depth make it stand out in a crowded genre. If you're into Soulsvanias, Zelda-likes, or just love seeing a solo dev swing for the fences, Tearscape is absolutely worth your time. I award Tearscape an 8 out of 10. Tearscape is available on PC. I played it exclusively on the Steam Deck with 0 issues, and therefore give it a Steam Deck rating of verified.
Tier placement.
Tearscape is a stylish, cleverly designed Soulsvania that punches far above its Game Boy demake appearance. The combat has surprising depth, the dungeon-centric exploration is consistently rewarding, and the atmosphere is far stronger than you'd expect from a one-dev project. There's a few rough edges, like the map clarity, the occasional rhythmless traps, and the disconnect between player agency and story progression, but nothing here to sour the experience in any meaningful way. The overall experience is polished, creative, and engaging. Tearscape finishes the hunt in the B tier. I'll leave it to you all to fight in the comments about whether or not Tearscape is an actual Metroidvania or just a Zelda-like. There's no way I'll be the scapegoat in that discussion.